I never thought a simple night out could turn into something I'd replay in my head for weeks, but here we are. It all started when I met Nolan at this dive bar downtown, the kind of place I usually avoid because it's too loud, too dark, and honestly too intimidating. But that night, I was meeting some friends, and Nolan was already there, sitting alone at the corner with this half smirk like he knew some secret no one else did. I'm usually the guy who keeps to himself. Not because I'm shy, but because I've learned how exhausting it can be to explain yourself or your preferences to people who already have their minds made up. Nolan, from the moment he caught my eye, something about him just made me want to dive in, even if I wasn't sure what I was diving into. We didn't talk much at first. Just casual smiles exchanged across the sticky bar counter while the jukebox played old rock songs. Then, out of nowhere, he stood up and came over with a confidence that was borderline bold. He introduced himself like he was used to making grand entrances, but his voice was so calm it disarmed me immediately. "Hey, I'm Nolan," he said, eyes locking onto mine like we were the only two people in the room. "I don't usually do this, but you seem like the kind of guy who's good at keeping secrets." I laughed, thinking he was joking. I told him I was just there with friends, nothing mysterious about me, but his grin only widened. "Good," he said, "because I'm about to tell you something, and I want you to promise me one thing." Curiosity was already pushing me forward. "What's that?" "Don't tell anyone." I was hooked. That line, "don't tell anyone," is like a key that unlocks every story you want to hear. It's that tiny promise that whatever's coming next is something rare, maybe even dangerous, but definitely real. Nolan leaned in, lowering his voice so only I could hear, "But first, I have to show you something." Before I could even ask what, he stood abruptly, stepping away from the bar. The room's lighting shifted in a way that made everything feel sharper, more immediate. Then, without a hint of hesitation, he started to take off his jacket. I blinked, took a step closer. He didn't stop there. Shirt next, then shoes. It wasn't exhibitionism, though. There was no performative flair, just this raw, quiet vulnerability that made the whole moment feel like it was suspended in time. "See?" he said, voice softer now. "This is the part nobody else gets to see. You promised, right?" "No one." I nodded, heart racing, wondering why this felt less like a dare and more like a trust I'd never been offered before. And just like that, I realized I was way more tangled up in Nolan's world than I'd ever planned. But honestly, I didn't want to be anywhere else. I stood there, staring at Nolan, trying to figure out what exactly I was supposed to do or say next. His bare skin under the dim bar lights didn't look like a challenge or a tease. It looked real, like someone who was trying to show me who he was beneath everything else, without any pretense. I felt this weird mix of nervousness and something else, like I was being invited into a part of his world that most people never got to see. "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked, my voice probably sounding a little too cautious. He shrugged, a little smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Because I don't want you to guess. I want you to know. No filters, no distractions, just me." I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to step back. Part of me wanted to reach out and hold on to whatever this was before it slipped away. I was trying to read him, but Nolan wasn't giving anything away. He just stood there, calm and open, like he was daring me to accept this strange kind of honesty. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was definitely not cooperating. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Now, you decide if you want to keep looking, or if you want to walk away." It was the kind of moment I didn't expect to have in a bar on a random Tuesday night, but suddenly, nothing else mattered. I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to know more. I took a step closer. "Okay, I'm looking." His eyes flickered with something. Relief, maybe? Or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of being seen without masks. The music shifted, a slow song now, and the bar's chatter dimmed into the background. Nolan reached out and tugged me toward a quieter corner, away from the crowd. We sat down at a tiny table, and he pulled his phone out, typing something quickly. "I want you to see this," he said, sliding the phone across to me. I looked down and saw a photo. Not a selfie, but something more intimate. It was a picture of a small apartment, walls covered with framed art, books stacked everywhere, and a big window letting in afternoon light. There was a couch with a blanket tossed over it, and a guitar leaning in the corner. "That's my place," Nolan said softly. "It's where I'm most me, not the guy you see at the bar. Not the guy who looks like he's got it all figured out." I smiled, feeling like I was being let in on a secret. "Looks cozy." "It is," he admitted. "I want to show you someday, but, like I said, no one else gets to know yet. You can't tell anyone." I nodded. "I won't." He leaned back, and for the first time since we met, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. You ever feel like you're playing a part just to survive? Like there's this version of you everyone expects, but it's not really who you are? "Yeah," I said, surprised by how easily the words came out. "All the time." He smiled, a little wistfully. "That's what I want to change. Starting with tonight." We sat there, talking about everything and nothing. Movies we loved, music that meant something, the weird quirks that made us who we are. It was easy, like we'd known each other longer than just a couple of hours, but there was this unspoken thing hanging between us, like a thread connecting something fragile and new. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I wanted to follow it. Then, out of nowhere, Nolan glanced at the clock and sighed. "I've got to get going soon. Early thing tomorrow." I nodded, suddenly feeling the night slipping away too fast. Before he stood up, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Promise me you won't tell anyone about tonight." Not a word. I promised, of course, because whatever this was, this secret, this trust, it felt like something rare, something worth protecting. As he pulled on his shirt and jacket, I realized that Nolan was someone who didn't just want to be seen. He wanted to be understood. And maybe, just maybe, tonight was the start of that. He smiled at me one last time before heading out the door, the night air swallowing him up. I stayed there a little longer, the warmth of the moment still buzzing through me, wondering what the hell just happened, and hoping it wasn't a one-time thing. After Nolan left, I sat there for a bit, nursing a beer that had gone warm and tasting more like regrets than anything else. The bar was still buzzing, but I was tuned out, my mind replaying every detail, the way he looked confident and vulnerable all at once. How he'd asked me to keep his secret like it was the most precious thing in the world. I didn't want to admit it, but I was hooked. The kind of hooked where you catch yourself checking your phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a message, a sign, anything. And, sure enough, about 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Nolan. "Thanks for sticking around." The text read, simple. No emojis, no fluff. Just that. I typed back, "Thanks for trusting me." Within seconds, "There's more. If you want." I stared at the screen, my heart doing this stupid leap that made it impossible to focus on anything else. More? More what? More of him? More of whatever this was? I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I want." That was the start of something that quickly became the highlight of my nights and the secret I guarded fiercely. Nolan wasn't one for grand gestures or long phone calls. His way was subtle, almost mysterious. A text here, a message there, sometimes a late-night knock on my apartment door that caught me off guard. One night, a week after we met, I got that knock. I wasn't expecting him. I was just winding down, half watching some show and scrolling through my phone. When I opened the door, Nolan was standing there, holding a small bag. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're persistent." He grinned, setting the bag down on my kitchen counter. "I like what we've got. Just thought you should know." We ate takeout in my tiny living room, talking about everything from our childhoods to music we hit on old playlists. It was easy, like the kind of easy that feels like a safe harbor when life gets messy. But there was always that word hanging in the air, secret. Nolan never wanted anyone else to know about us. Not his friends, not his family. It was like this beautiful thing we had was so fragile that even a whisper could break it. One night, I asked him about it. Why all the secrecy? If this is real, why hide it? He looked away for a moment, then met my eyes, because not everyone is ready to see me. And maybe I'm not ready to show all of me yet. That honesty hit me like a punch. I realized that what Nolan was offering wasn't just a casual fling or some fun distraction. It was a glimpse into a part of himself that he'd kept locked away for a long time. I wanted to be the one to hold the key. Weeks turned into months, and we grew closer in ways that surprised me. Nolan's walls started to come down, bit by bit. He introduced me to his favorite coffee shop, took me to the park where he used to skateboard as a kid, and slowly, I became part of his world. But that secret promise, don't tell anyone, still hung between us. Then one evening, Nolan invited me over. When I arrived, the place was different. Less like the apartment in the photo he'd shown me. More lived in, more open. Candles flickered on the shelves, and a soft playlist hummed in the background. He took my hand and led me to the couch, sitting close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "I want to show you something," he said, voice low. I raised an eyebrow. "More clothes coming off?" he laughed. "Maybe, but this time, it's different." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn notebook. Opening it, he showed me pages filled with writing, poetry, short stories, even sketches here and there. "I used to think no one would ever understand," Nolan said. "But you make me want to be brave." I felt this lump form in my throat. It wasn't just about attraction anymore. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the kind of connection that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. We spent the night talking about dreams, fears, and the future. For the first time, Nolan wasn't hiding. Not really. As the night wore on, he wrapped his arms around me, and in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, this secret we shared was something worth fighting for. But deep down, I also knew that keeping it hidden would only get harder. Because love, no matter how quiet or secret, has a way of demanding to be seen. The next morning, I woke up with Nolan still curled up beside me, sunlight sneaking through the blinds and casting stripes across his face. I watched him for a while, feeling a weird mix of calm and excitement. It was the first time I'd spent the night in someone's bed in a long while, and not just anyone's bed, but Nolan's. Somehow, that made everything feel different. He stirred and opened his eyes, flashing me a sleepy smile. "Morning," he whispered. "Morning," I replied, voice still rough from sleep. There was this quiet comfort between us, like no words were needed to fill the space. But then Nolan shifted, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "About last night." He hesitated, and I could tell he was searching for the right words. I waited, encouraging him with a nod. "I'm not great at this whole relationship thing. I keep thinking I have to protect myself by keeping things under wraps," he said. His eyes were serious. "But with you, it feels different. Like maybe I don't have to be so guarded." I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair off his forehead. "I get that. It's scary to be vulnerable. But I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, and the tension in his shoulders eased. That morning, we stayed tangled up in each other, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like the start of something real, a slow build rather than a sudden blast. Over the next few weeks, our secret world expanded. We found little routines, late-night texts filled with silly jokes, quick coffee breaks stolen between work, and weekend afternoons wandering through the city's quieter streets. Nolan was still careful, always reminding me about the secrecy, but each moment we shared chipped away at the walls he'd built. One evening, we went to that same bar where we met. It wasn't crowded, and the usual buzz felt softer, more intimate. As we settled into a booth, Nolan's hand found mine under the table. "Do you ever wish you could just be open about us? No hiding, no secrets?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He looked thoughtful, biting his lip. "All the time. But it's complicated. My family, they're not exactly the most accepting. And some of my friends, well, they have their own ideas about me." I squeezed his hand. "Sounds lonely," he shrugged. It is, but with you, it feels less that way. We were quiet for a moment, just holding on to each other. Then a group of guys at the bar started laughing loudly, making some crude jokes that caught my attention. And Nolan's too. His grip on my hand tightened, and I saw anger flicker in his eyes. "Don't let them get to you," I murmured. He shook his head. "It's not that. It's just... Sometimes I wish I could stand up and say, yes, this is who I am, but it's easier to stay quiet." I nodded, understanding more than he realized. We'd both been there, scared of judgment, of losing people who mattered. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight," I said gently. "But someday, we can face it together." He smiled, this small, real smile that reached his eyes. "I'd like that." That night, as we walked home side by side, the city lights casting shadows around us, I felt like we were stepping into something new. Something fragile but full of promise. A few days later, Nolan called me out of the blue. "Want to come over? I've been working on something." I agreed without hesitation. When I got to his apartment, the place was filled with music and the smell of fresh paint. On the wall, there was a canvas covered, waiting for its big reveal. He led me over, hands trembling slightly as he pulled the cover off. It was a painting, a vibrant, abstract piece that somehow captured chaos and calm all at once. "It's my first real piece since a long time," Nolan said quietly. "I haven't told anyone about my art before. It's another secret." I looked at the painting and then back at him, feeling honored to see this glimpse of his soul. "Thanks for sharing that with me," I said. He nodded, eyes shining. "Thanks for wanting to see." We sat together on the floor, surrounded by paints and brushes, talking about dreams and fears in a way that felt safe. For the first time, I realized that Nolan's "don't tell anyone" wasn't just about hiding love. It was about protecting himself from a world that wasn't always kind to people like him, and I wanted to be the one who helped him rewrite that story. But as much as I wanted to shout from the rooftops about us, I knew some secrets needed careful tending, and some trusts were worth guarding with everything you had. Still, I couldn't help wondering, how long could we keep this beautiful, fragile thing just between us before the world demanded to know? A few nights after that, Nolan and I found ourselves sitting on the fire escape of his apartment building. It was cramped and the air had that city grit to it, the kind that sticks to your skin and smells like car exhaust mixed with late-night pizza. But it was quiet enough to talk without shouting over traffic or music. We'd been sharing a bottle of cheap red wine and letting the city hum around us. The moment felt suspended between the buzz of the city and the quiet between us. I could see Nolan's jaw clenched in that familiar way, like he was wrestling with something. "You ever think about what it'd be like if people knew?" I asked, watching him trace shapes in the dirt with his finger. "Sometimes," he said after a pause, "but it scares me. I've been judged before, by family, friends, coworkers. It's like the second I step out of line, they erase everything they thought they knew about me." I nodded, wanting to say something that would make it better. "That's awful." He shrugged, looking tired. "It's just how it is for me. I've gotten good at disappearing." There was a silence that felt heavy between us. I wanted to bridge it, but didn't know how. "So why me? Why let me in if you're so scared?" I asked quietly. He looked at me then, eyes steady and real, not hidden behind his usual half-smirk. "Because with you, I don't have to disappear," he said. "You see me, the parts one try to hide, and the parts I'm proud of. It's exhausting pretending to be someone else all the time." I reached out and took his hand. It was warm, grounding. "You don't have to pretend anymore." He squeezed my hand, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was the turning point, the moment when things would shift from secret to something more open. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went almost blank. "It's my mom," he said, voice tight. I could hear the weight in those two words. Nolan rarely mentioned family, and when he did, it wasn't usually easy. I didn't pry. Instead, I just stayed close. He stood up, pacing a little as he stared at his phone. "I told her about me," he said finally. "About us." I blinked, heart skipping. "And?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, but it was hollow. "She said it's a phase. That I'm confused. That I'm going to regret this. I wanted to punch something, but I held back. "That's brutal," I said softly. He shrugged, looking exhausted. "Yeah, it's like she doesn't even know me." I reached for him again, pulling him into a hug. He stiffened at first, but then relaxed, burying his face in my shoulder. "We'll get through it," I whispered. "Together." He pulled back, eyes glistening but determined. "I don't want to hide anymore." I smiled, even though my heart was heavy. "Neither do I." That night, things changed. We didn't just talk about secrets or art or fears. We talked about what it meant to be brave enough to be ourselves, even when the world made it hard. And Nolan made a decision. "I'm going to come out at work," he said quietly. "Not to everyone, but to a few people I trust." I raised an eyebrow. "That's huge." He nodded. "I know, but I want to live without hiding. Even if it's scary as hell." I felt this swell of pride in something else. Hope. "Want me to be there?" I asked. His grin was small but real. "Would you?" The following days were a mix of nervous energy and quiet preparation. Nolan rehearsed conversations, worked out what he'd say, and who he'd trust. I was by his side every step, offering support and the occasional sarcastic comment to lighten the mood. When the day came, Nolan called me before heading to work. "I'm nervous," he admitted. "You'll be great," I said. "Just be yourself." A few hours later, Nolan texted me. They took it better than I expected. Some awkward questions, but mostly support. "I think this is a start." I smiled so hard my face hurt. We met up that evening to celebrate, laughing over burgers and fries, the weight of secrets feeling lighter than it had in months. But even as things felt like they were moving forward, I could tell Nolan was still carrying some shadows. Old wounds that didn't heal overnight. One night, after a particularly long day at work, he opened up about his past relationships, how he'd been hurt by people who couldn't accept him, how he'd learned to shut down to protect himself. "I don't want to lose you," he said, voice cracking. I pulled him close. "You won't. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, I realized love isn't just about fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes, it's about the quiet promise to stay, even when things get messy. Nolan and I were still figuring everything out, the balance between secrecy and openness, fear and courage. But for the first time, it felt like we were on the same side, ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the biggest risk is simply choosing to be seen. And with Nolan, I was ready to take that risk every day. After Nolan's little coming out moment at work, things started to feel like they were shifting. Not just between us, but in his whole world. He wasn't suddenly shouting it from the rooftops or plastering it all over social media, but there was this new confidence in him, like he was standing a little taller, breathing a little easier. And honestly, it made me feel hopeful, like we were finally stepping out of the shadows we'd been living in. One Saturday afternoon, Nolan invited me over for what he called a quote, project. When I got to his place, the vibe was different. More relaxed, less guarded. He'd pulled his art out of the drawers and scattered it around the living room. Paintings, sketches, and those scribbled notebooks. But what caught my attention was a blank canvas set up on an easel near the window, sunlight pouring over it. "I want to paint something with you," Nolan said, a little shy but excited. "Like something that represents us." I was surprised. Nolan's art had always been personal, but sharing it like this felt like a step deeper, a way of inviting me inside in a way words sometimes failed. I nodded, smiling. "I'm in." We spent the afternoon mixing colors, laughing when we knocked over a paint jar or accidentally smeared a brushstroke the wrong way. Nolan was quiet at first, but as the paint covered the canvas in abstract shapes and streaks, he started opening up. We talked about the fears we still carried, the parts of ourselves we were still trying to understand, and what it meant to be seen and accepted. At one point, Nolan paused, stepping back to look at the canvas. "It's messy, but I kind of like it." "Yeah," I said. "Like us." He grinned, that half smile that still made my heart skip. Later, after we cleaned up the paint and sat cross-legged on the floor, Nolan pulled something out of a drawer, a small box. "I've been holding on to this for a while," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring. My breath caught. "It's not fancy," he admitted, "but it means something, like a promise. To keep being brave, to keep being honest. With you, and with myself." I reached out and took the ring, turning it over in my hand. "Are you serious?" His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "Yeah, I want us to be more than just a secret. I want us to be real." I swallowed hard, overwhelmed but happy in a way I hadn't expected. "Then let's do it," I said. "No more hiding." Nolan smiled, sliding the ring onto my finger. In that moment, it felt like the invisible walls around us were finally starting to crumble. But life, of course, isn't always that simple. A few days later, I was out grabbing coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a social media post. Someone had recognized Nolan from the bar and tagged a few mutual friends, hinting at his relationship with me. The caption was less than kind. My chest tightened as I read the comments, some supportive, but others filled with judgment and assumptions. I called Nolan immediately, my voice shaky. "Hey, did you post something online, or did someone else?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, I haven't told anyone except a few people at work." I ran a hand through my hair, heart pounding. "Someone's outed us. Or at least guessed." There was a pause on his end, then a deep breath. I was afraid this would happen, but I guess it's time we stopped pretending. That night, Nolan came over and we sat together, phone in hand, scrolling through the comments. Some were hurtful, but others were surprisingly kind. It was a collision of worlds, private and public, fear and acceptance. "I don't know how to handle this," Nolan confessed, voice quiet. "But I don't want to run anymore." I squeezed his hand. "You're not alone." Over the next few days, we faced a whirlwind of conversations, some awkward, some painful, some hopeful. Nolan's friends at work rallied around him, and even a few family members reached out with cautious support. But the hardest part was still to come. One evening, Nolan's mom called. I was there when he answered. The tone was tense, strained. I caught glimpses of his face as he listened. Hurt, frustration, a flicker of something like defiance. When he hung up, he looked at me, eyes glassy. "She said she needs time, that she's scared, but she wants to try." I nodded, feeling the weight of that fragile hope. That night, Nolan and I lay together, the city lights casting long shadows through the window. "Whatever happens, we have each other," I said. He smiled softly. "Yeah, and that's enough for now." It wasn't the fairy tale I imagined when I first met him, but it was real, messy, complicated, and entirely worth it. And as I held Nolan close, I realized that sometimes love isn't about the big declarations or perfect endings. It's about the courage to keep showing up, even when the world isn't ready. We had taken off our masks, our clothes, and laid ourselves bare. Now it was time to face whatever came next, together. The months that followed were a delicate balancing act, between openness and caution, between hope and lingering fear. Nolan's mom reached out more often, her voice softer each time, and though their conversations were sometimes halting, the walls between them were slowly coming down. I saw Nolan grow stronger, not because the world suddenly became easy, but because he was choosing to face it, piece by piece, with me beside him. One chilly evening, we found ourselves back on that fire escape where we'd had so many late-night talks. The city sprawled beneath us, a mix of distant sirens and flickering streetlights. Nolan slipped his hand into mine, fingers curling around like a promise. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd feel this okay being me." Not fully, anyway. I smiled, squeezing his hand. "It takes time. But you're not alone anymore." He turned to me with that familiar half-smile, the one that still managed to stop me in my tracks. "Thank you. For everything." I could say the same. For a long moment, we just sat there, sharing the silence that felt warm instead of heavy. Later, as we walked down the stairs, Nolan stopped and pulled me close. "I want to stop hiding, not just from the world, but from myself," he said. "I want us to be out there, in all the messy, beautiful ways." I nodded, heart full. "Me too." It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration, just two people choosing to be authentic, together. From then on, we took small steps. We went to family dinners where Nolan's mom would squeeze his hand knowingly. We showed up at gatherings with friends who knew our story, who accepted us without hesitation. And when strangers asked questions or threw sideways looks, we faced them side by side. The ring Nolan gave me, I still wear it. Not because it's flashy, but because it's a symbol of that choice we made. To be brave, to be honest, and to trust in each other even when it's hard. Looking back, I realized that night in the bar, the night he told me not to tell anyone and took off his clothes, wasn't just about vulnerability or a secret. It was the start of something real, a moment where two people dared to show their true selves and found, against all odds, a place to belong. Love, I've learned, isn't about perfection or rushing. It's about patience, trust, and the quiet courage to be seen. And with Nolan, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Because we're in this together. Undressed truths, messy fears, and all.